It's been a day, and I've had a chance to come back and take a look at the wing. I'm pretty happy with it. A couple of high ribs, actually just two that I can find. I just take a straight edge and run it across it, and everything's good until this rib right here. It's maybe a 30-second high, not too bad. And then on the back ribs here, pretty good until we get to the last rib right here, and that's also a little bit high. But I think it's all going to work out when I get it all sanded down. It should require just a very minimal amount of sanding. So, since I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and finish gluing in the ribs, and then I'm going to work on my paper conduit for the servo. I like to use paper conduits for my servo wires, especially in the wing. I did have one model where the wire was chafing on a rib without the wire or paper conduit, and it actually created a short, and I was able to recover the model, but it was not pretty. So I do a pretty simple way. Some people use cardboard tubes from model rocketry, but I like to use paper. It's lightweight, it's simple. What I do is I cover a dowel stick, and this is a 1/2 inch, or I guess it's about 12 or 13 mm. Cover it with clear packing tape. I've already done this part right here before. Then I rub the whole thing down with candle wax that acts as a release agent. Does a pretty good job of it. Then just take paper, and usually 2 wraps is all I need. And then with the edge down, I just soak the rest of it. And see, you don't really have to do this part, but I do it so the tube won't collapse inside as I try to insert it through the holes in the ribs. And as you can see, because of that candle wax, sometimes you have to give it a little twist like that to get it to pop free, but this one's just going to slide right off. There you have one very lightweight paper conduit. Got this wing conduit glued in. I did have to enlarge the holes just a little bit with the little step reamer that I have. The dowel was 1/2 of an inch diameter, and the drill bit I used was 1/2 inch, so when the paper was actually glued up, it was a little bit slightly larger than 1/2 inch. But it's all glued in. I think it's going to work well. Now it's time to add some hinge support blocks, giving a little more meat, to the trailing edge. Then mark the location of where the hinges would be. Now, if I were building this exactly per the plans and per the article, at this point, I believe I could go ahead and add my leading edge sheeting and a little bit of trailing edge sheeting, about 1 inch wide, I believe it is. And then there's some sheeting covering up to the center point, but you see this line here, these bays after the spar, all the way to the tip, I believe, are open. Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make it a little more scale here and sheet the entire wing. Now, one other thing that gives me a lot of strength right there, which I think the full sheeting combination with the spar and the shear webs all makes it a very strong wing. One thing that the plans, and this is very old school, the plans calls for is fiberglassing the center section. And this is pretty heavy fiberglass. They're talking 2 plies of 6-ounce fiberglass cloth. And I haven't fiberglassed the center section of a wing, I think, since 1987. Here's where I kind of want to try to add some strength to this wing. I've already talked about having a one-piece spar all the way across, not having a break in it, as is shown on the plans. That's one way. The other way is I want to try to make the sheeting as much to cover both wings at the same time. What I want to do now then, to try to impart some more strength to the wing with the one-piece spar, the sheeting covering both wing halves, is to actually go ahead and try to get the second part of the wing built up to this part here. And then, as the plans show, here's your dihedral in the wing. It says the top of the wing should be flat, so this part here is flat. So if I can get these two halves built, joined, and when I join it, I can jack up each end for the right dihedral so that the spar is straight. Then I think I can get this top wing then sheeted, all completely sheeted, and then I can flip it over and do the bottom part. I won't be including the bottom spar until I actually flip it over. Alright, so with that in mind, this is going to be the trick, because I have this jig that I need to put on this side as well, which might interfere here with the center. That's the center ribs. That's one reason why rib 1 I did not glue into position. I want to keep both rib 1s loose until I can raise both wing halves up to the right dihedral, and then at that point I can glue both rib 1s together and to the rest of the structure. Anyway, it might sound confusing, but I'll show you what I'm talking about as we get along here. So I have my jig set up for the right wing half. The ribs have been threaded onto the carbon rods. Nothing been glued yet. Now, the top of the wing with the dihedral is level. And on the plans here it says that you jack up the very tip by 1 180 thousandths of an inch. Well, 180 thousandths is basically 3/16 of an inch. So what I did was I used some shims and jacked up the base for the left wing 1 3/16 of an inch. Well, that ended up being not quite level for the wing. I used both, sighting down the wing and a long straight edge placed on top, and that ended up being not quite enough, so I raised it up to 1 5/16 of an inch, just a little bit higher. And even though there is a little bit of daylight in certain spots along the rib, along the spar, for the most part it is level. What was a little bit perplexing about that is the plan shows raising each wingtip by 1 3/16 of an inch. However, for me to get the top of the wing level, I only had to raise the one wingtip up, and I'm not really quite sure why that was. So I have my leading edge and my trailing edge. I'm going to try to cut both the slots at the same time. To do that, I needed a scrap piece of wood to raise up the trailing edge so it would be level Trailing edge and leading edge are placed into position, but I'm not happy with the trailing edge. I thought if I cut both slots at the same time they would match it perfectly, but that's not been the case. Starting around the root rib and you move out, they do pretty well. But then as you start to get about mid-wing, slots get more and more off until you get out here to rib 12 and it's way off. Looking back on this, I think the reason the slots were off was because the way the leading edge and the trailing edge taper toward each other out toward the tip, and that alters the geometry somehow. I cut 5 new slots right here. I didn't want to continue on because it would just end up making the slot really wide. Alright, I think that worked a little bit better. Actually, I think I went a little bit too far out on the tip right out here, but it's a lot better than it was. Triple and quadruple checked everything. Trailing edge has been tacked in a couple spots, same with the leading edge. I think everything is pretty much set where it needs to be, so I'm going to start gluing in the leading, trailing edge and some ribs. Okay, remember all of my trailing edge, leading edge, and all that is cut oversize. So now it's time to start shaping it. I'm going to be using a couple different planes. This cheapy Stanley to kind of get started, to get through some of the CA soaked balsa. And then I'll probably follow up with this. And then maybe an even finer one. So in preparation, I have taped off the ribs. I don't want to damage them right yet. I'm just doing the leading edge or trailing edge for now. I also tacked in a couple of support pieces here, which were not part of the plan, but I needed some support as I pushed down on this with the plane. And also I tacked in a support piece here on the bottom. It's just tacked into the bottom of the rib. And that all gives me some pretty good support while I plane and then use a sanding block. I'm going to take care of this rib now. Go ahead and level it out with the others. So I put some masking tape on these 3 ribs to protect them. seems to be pretty good except for this area right here. Getting a little hit right there. A little hit right here. All right, I think that's about as good as I'm going to get it. Next time, we sheet the wing.